President Biden says he will not extend the deadline to evacuate from Afghanistan. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby asked military leaders to be ready for contingency options if adjusting the timetable becomes necessary. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Doug Ollivant is a senior fellow at New America. He served as director for Iraq at the National Security Council under the Bush and Obama administrations. Doug, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mimi.
Do we currently have a record of every American citizen still in Afghanistan, and do we know where they are?
Doubtful. Now, I'm sure that list is getting refined, and I'm sure that people all over the world are contributing to that list. But when you go to a country, Americans are a free people. When you show up in Afghanistan, there's no requirement for you to register with the embassy and tell the embassy that you're there in country. And further, when you leave, there's no requirement for you to tell the embassy that you've left if you did register with them. So any list that the embassy has will have false negatives, people who are in country but aren't on the list, and false positives, people who are on the list but are no longer in country. And that's just inherent in being free Americans.
So if, again, free Americans, they decide they don't want to leave Afghanistan, like maybe journalists or human rights advocates, will they be on their own?
I think so. So we'll have those two categories. I think you're right. There will be some journalists who stay. There will be some human rights advocates. I think the larger category may well be naturalized Americans or even Native Americans of Afghan descent who don't want to leave their family members in Afghanistan alone. I think as we're reading the news reports, we're seeing that this may be the largest group that's still in country, groups of 20 and 30 extended families, naturalized Americans and in some cases native-born Americans of Afghan descent who went to Afghanistan thinking correctly that this summer was the last chance to see their relatives and thinking incorrectly that they'd be okay till the end of August.
And then they get stuck.
Exactly.
Well, Secretary Blinken says there are roughly 1,500 American citizens still in Afghanistan. What happens when we get to the 31st and we're not done? What do you know of any contingency plans in place for those that do want to get out?
I think for those who do want to get out, we'll continue to work with our partners. It's notable the Qataris have really stepped up and been very helpful. We're hearing stories of the Qatari ambassador personally escorting groups of Americans through Taliban checkpoints to get them to the airport and evacuated. So I suspect that we will still have friends who have relations with the Taliban inside Afghanistan. But let's be clear, after the evacuation is over, it's going to be dicey, and you're going to be more or less on your own in Afghanistan, just as you would if you were visiting in Iran or visiting in North Korea. These are regimes with which we do not have good relations, and if you get in trouble with that government, there's not a whole lot the USG can do for you.
Well, what does that do to logistical planning when that, we've got a hard deadline, but then we've got a contingency plan, either for the Pentagon or the State Department?
No, this is going to be a very, very complex problem. I think we've been probably pretty good about getting all the Americans out of Kabul. What we're probably being pretty quiet about, prudently, is just where are all these other Americans? I doubt these 1,500 are all still in Kabul. They may well be in other cities around Afghanistan, or even deep, again, visiting relatives deep in rural Afghanistan. How do they get out? How do they find a way to cross a border, perhaps get to Pakistan? These are going to be really hard questions, and I suspect they're going to have to be managed just one each. Every case is going to start becoming its own little operation, rather than having one large operation that people flock to.
Doug, I want to ask you about the coordination that is going on between DoD and State, because Secretary Blinken said yesterday, he said, quote, over the past 24 hours, we've been in direct contact with approximately 500 additional Americans, and for the other 1,000, quote, aggressively reaching out to them. So how are they working together?
Well, I think aggressively reaching out to them indicates what we were talking about at the beginning. We don't necessarily know where these people are. We don't, you're not required to give a phone number to the embassy or an email to the embassy. And if you're out in the hinterlands, your phone and your email may not be particularly good. So again, these are all going to be really difficult. I'm sure state and DoD are absolutely talking to each other about how you get each of these out. But this is just a really complex operation having come on us so quickly. And again, many of these people aren't being particularly aggressive about getting themselves out or are setting conditions under which, only under these conditions will we leave. We've seen a couple, I'm sure exceptional cases, but nonetheless about people running small animal rescues in Afghanistan, stating they're not leaving unless they can take all their 100 animals out with them and their staffs and so on.
Doug,
again, I'm sure these are exceptional cases, but they show the difficulty that we're going to get into with these one eaches of really unique cases as we get to the end of the evacuation.
Doug, quickly, I want to ask you, because you were counterinsurgency advisor for Afghanistan about 10 years ago. What did you see back then as the end game? I'm just curious about what you were thinking back then as opposed to now.
I think even 10 years ago, it was pretty plain, at least to me, that the problem set was so complex that we were never going to be particularly successful. I spent a month of my life running around Ghazni province, and it was always controlled by the Taliban. So when Ghazni city fell just a few weeks ago now, that did not come as a surprise to me at all. It had always been, Taliban controlled just 500, 1,000 meters outside the city gates.
All right. Well, we'll continue to watch this, Doug. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mimi.